I've been seeing these memes and these comments that the Democrats caved. And that's why we don't want to be Democrats. And that's why we've left the party. And that's why we've lost the White House. And the spine of the Democrats is just not there. How do you read those conversations? I know it's very complicated. I know it's very detailed. And this unpacks a whole bunch of other questions. But if I were to ask just directly, did the Democrats cave? Like 54 days, you're in, there's a stance. I guess it's based on values. And then all of a sudden, you're basically where you are 54 days later in the same place as where you were at the start of this. Is that a fair statement? And then what does Shayla Moon say when you hear, yep, there goes the Democrats, they caved, and that's exactly why we don't want to rock with them because they can't stand up to the pressure of, what's taking place in Washington right now.
The party has probably been going through a identity crisis since November of 2024 of where we are, what we support, and again, how we change the face of what the party is. I think this is why you saw the victories of, the new mayor of New York City, the governor in Virginia, and wanting to see a new face. But when you begin to get to understanding who the 8 members were, yes, some are not up for reelection. Some will not face reelection until 2028 and 2030. It was a thing of where they were safe. They are not a part of this current election cycle, but also understanding what states they represent and who are the major influencers that are in their backyard. And at the end of the day, understanding where special interest and industry unfortunately guides many of the votes and many of the policies that we see here in this city. I'll take, for example, um, you know, Senator Whip, Dick Durbin out of Illinois. Well, what's one of the biggest hubs that are there in the state of Illinois? It's Chicago. It's the airports. It is Chicago O'Hare. Well, being in Denver, which is also a major hub, you have United Airlines. And if you are dealing with a major hub in Illinois, in Virginia, you also have Dulles, another hub of United Airlines. Of course, you may have a Tim Kaine and others say, we've got to get industry aligned. And as we were beginning to see the fallout from air traffic controllers, I believe that same week you had Secretary Duffy issue his guidance regarding what was happening with reduction of flights. What's going to influence their vote? What impacts industry? Aside from just the federal workforce being furloughed, what other industries were at risk? How was it impacting trade? How was it impacting some of the other areas that we know many of those senators have those hubs and industry outlets in their backyard? And that's what was beginning to happen.
Do or does it resonate when you see those memes and someone says, "Ugh, the Dems caved"? Is it
You know,
is it the 8 you're speaking of, or is that what happened there where they had to find 8 or they had to find a few?
they
Politics
have
is
to find the
about
folks,
they had to
and
find the votes and they're figuring out how to find them, where to find them, what to give. It's like, man, it's going to cost me politically if I do this. Well, this is going to benefit. Like, there's a bunch of horse trading, I think, in terms of politics. They had to find the votes, and they did. Is that the story?
that's will continue to be up for the debate. Did they cave, or do you have again an identity crisis? You have a Democratic Party that believes that they're playing, by the same games and rules that they were. This is not, the party that you had when you had the likes of Ted Kennedy or the likes of, when you had true bipartisanship. This is a new space of where you have another party that wants to inflict pain,
Hmm.
that capitulates and bends at the knee of a president. And I think it was that of where the American public said that, hey, if we have endured this pain up into this moment in time, let's keep going. Let's see where else it will be exposed. And through the course of that shutdown, you had certainly President Trump talking about, yeah, I don't want the states to release SNAP funding. He's telling you he wanted the American public and citizens to starve because that's kind of what this party is right now, to inflict pain. You had Russ Boyd saying, I want to inflict pain. I want to inflict pain on blue states. And so you had seven individuals, seven Democrats, one independent, who I believe also were very empathetic. And the imagery of people at food banks, at food lines, our military, our teachers, our other civilians, who are part of the federal workforce hurting here. But then when it started carrying over to retail and its impact on small business owners, on restaurants, on transportation services, you had to make a change. It's one thing for it just to be the federal workforce, but when you saw impact on other industry, that's what I largely believe is what influenced the votes of those eight individuals.
What was the impact or is the impact of this federal government shutdown on ordinary people? And was it a political move or was it necessary to be done? What did you think about this government shutdown?
I live in Prince George's County, which is maybe 70% African American, but also 70% federal employees. And, I've had to look at it through kind of that lens, not only of my neighbors, but some of the changing efforts and just demographics, and I would say even resources that are impacting this area. It's been largely insular because you had, federal employment that was the industry here. You had Black wealth, and two of the richest Black communities in the country are in this area. You have Bowie, you have Fort Washington. But I've kind of been aching it of this feels like Detroit. And I say that to say that what does a community in a city feel like when you have a loss of industry? And where does everyone go? Where does a sister who's a statistician at NOAA go? There are but so many jobs in higher ed or in the nonprofit sector. Where does a brother who certainly maybe does statistics at the Department of Labor, where does that person go to find opportunity? And we often in many of our ancestors would say, get that good government job because it always was a pipeline and pathway for Black economic advancement. It's largely why Mayor for Life in Washington, D.C., Marion Barry, he implemented a program that allowed even for youth beginning at the age of 14 to enter into the federal workforce.
Mm.
And you have many who still, are a part of that active program, not only creating an opportunity of employment, but what it was of stability, what it was of being able to be a part of, for many, a unionized workforce to where they had others advocating on behalf of their labor. And for Denver, you're absolutely correct. And, again, not just even being limited to the military, you had Rocky Flats that was there that implemented and certainly provided employment opportunities to many Black folks there. You have many of the Denver outside of DC, I think, has maybe the second or the third largest federal building occupation in a major city. And so, what that means is just it was an attack on Black folks. And for those that have actively been watching and reading how Project 2025 has been advancing and some of the EOs that have come out of this administration during this time of the shutdown, they have unfortunately been very targeted on Black, Brown, and other disenfranchised and disadvantaged groups.
I want to I want to underscore that right now in terms of the shutdown of the federal government. You say, based on Project 2025, this was an attack on Black folks. Thinking of that way, can you be more kind of specific in terms of someone who would say, well, Black folks are not that important to shut down the entire government? Can you kind of dig into that statement you made?
Well, absolutely. Well, looking at certainly again, in many of the attacks that we've seen and witnessed from Project 2025, it's been an attack on Black wealth. And, it's why, we are talking about the number of 300,000 Black women that have been laid off and lost their jobs through the course of this period, particularly during this administration. If you can undermine and undercut one leadership, but if you also can undermine the economic advancement, not only in terms of sustainability as an individual, but you're going to limit philanthropy. If Black folks aren't working, they're not giving, which means that for other projects and programs that support our community, you're kneecapping them as well. If you have the ability, and he's only gone after cities that have had majority Black or minority populations.
No, keep going. Oh, I
I
think.
think no, that was me.
Oh, was
Or
that
then
you?
under Black and brown leadership, that is another way of undercutting programs that support our community educationally and health outcomes. Certainly in care for our vulnerable communities, our disabled and our seniors, which has adverse impact on our community, and that's what this has been. But why I say this shutdown, probably more so than what we even saw in the first administration of the Trump presidency, is that there's what he's been utilizing in executive orders to target access to capital, access to contracts, and access to networks. And one of the things, and why I say this feels more so an attack on Black folks, because of what we've heard from other cabinet members in this administration of saying that they want to inflict pain. They want to inflict pain on programs that have been heavily utilized by us, certainly getting into WIC, getting into SNAP, getting into fair housing programs, and certainly even what we've seen with the Department of Education and early childhood ECE education programs that are often funded at the federal level. But there's another EO and a few other things that have happened as of recently in this administration's attack against what he calls DEI.
Uh-huh.
And with DEI from Russell Vought and even what we saw a couple of days ago with the Treasury's announcement and stating that they are issuing guidance from all of these federal agencies to look for waste and abuse, particularly as it relates to contracting. Well, they're going after the 8A program. The 8A program created by former Representative Perrin Mitchell, a storied seat that we've seen Kweisi Mfume and Elijah Cummings, and now Kweisi Mfume again, hold that focus on SBA 8A program and contracting procurement. Well, that was a pipeline for Black wealth folks to accumulate wealth through these opportunities, through airport vending, through construction, through transportation efforts. And if you undermine the ability for minority owned businesses not only to survive and thrive, but also their ability to hire folks, and we know minority businesses tend to hire those who look like them, then you're also creating a different attack against us. But with these EOs that have come out through the course of these last few weeks, they've been primarily targeted on programs that impact Black America, like MBDA, the Minority Business Development Agency, which, even though saved and is codified, they are eliminating all of their staff through what they call a RIF, a reduction in workforce. And so
Wow.
this is another way of kneecapping federal programs that have historically helped and served us. And in ensuring that if you can downsize the federal workforce that support those programs, then you can then find themselves on a pipeline and in a pathway for full elimination, which is what we're seeing. We still don't know and probably won't know what damage still has taken place at these agencies while people were not in these federal buildings. And this was another part of and an extension of Doge to undermine and undercut these programs that benefit much of Black America.
What are your thoughts about the Trump brand? And what I mean by that, there's a certain way of doing things. And you've been following these politics in Washington and, policy and, been in the weeds of this a long time. So you definitely see that things are done in a very different way that we have probably ever seen politically. And ever might be, too strong of a word. But with that, is that way of governing starting to wear thin, even on the supporters of that brand? And then also, you mentioned Epstein and those Epstein files. I know that there were a lot of individuals that were
Mhm.
really attached to Donald J. Trump because of his commitment to go after, that list and the and protect children and that whole moral issue around Epstein. And then it started to be like, well, there is no list and that's not a big deal. And part of his support base was like, no, that's actually more than a big deal. That's why we're here at this party. And
Mhm.
the more we started to hear about Epstein, the more we started to hear about everything else, including a government shutdown. Am I going too far in that direction or
No,
no?
it's not on the fringe of a conspiracy theory or any of that. All of it is interconnected. And, why you had Speaker Johnson that didn't swear in Adelita Grijalva. She's the 218th vote to discharge the petition to vote and release the Epstein files. So you have those many of the QAnon track and others who just also, certainly believed and wanted to see the truth regarding the Epstein files, who felt that this also was very tactical to, delay the release. You had many that feel that this was very tactical of not having federal employees in many of the government offices so they can continue with the extension of what Doge did at the earlier part of the year of bullying and inflicting pain, and as well as certainly the issue of data privacy as it relates to these federal agencies. As I said, it's still, we won't know again what damage truly has been done through the course of this current shutdown. And then when you get into some of the other behaviors that were taking place at this time, not only in the State Department, the attacks that we saw happening within the Caribbean, some of the concerning payments that have gone to Venezuela, the issues impacting tariffs, and then to see and witness, what is also happening with the interior of the White House, the People's House. And when you have an administration that has come to the conclusion that he's only going to represent one group of the American public, this also is leading into stating that he's only trying to create an American reality that does not serve everyone. And if a government shutdown can help exposing that and certainly continuing with the stereotypes that we saw associated with SNAP, I mean, for the longest time, and going back even to Reagan, the imagery of Black women were the face of what they thought certainly SNAP and food benefits were. Now to find out that the data shows completely different, that it is rural, white, and it's male. And so, this, if it weren't the exposures of those truths, I don't think that you also would have had the American public leaning into this particular shutdown as much as they haven't had in previous ones because of everything else happening economically. We've had what, three government shutdowns in recent years. You had one during the Biden administration. You had the second longest one that happened under the Obama years as related to ACA and Ted Cruz holding the American public and hostage with ACA. But in this instance, it wasn't where it was inflicting pain on the American public. Many just thought, hey, if the park service is closed for a few days, that only impacts only a few of our population. This one showed that it can bear pain on all, every segment of this country.
You know, um, Again, you began the conversation about not only the impact of the shutdown on Black people, but even the intentional um, attack on Black people utilizing a shutdown. Would you say, from your vantage point, the Black community was tremendously hurt by this shutdown? We've seen a attack on Black assets and equity.
Mhm.
And in some regards, when we think about gentrification, generational wealth that will not be regained for generations. Um,
Mhm.
how much of a setback do you see this recent 54 days and this administration? Where does that place Black folks? What should we be paying attention to? And is there a strategy or a path forward? What should we do?
Well, if you think about it intersectionally, let's get into just the financial markets. Even for those who are federal employees, they will get back pay on monies lost, but that credit rating, that's not prepared. FICO and every Equinox and everyone, they're still going to show as mispayments, which we know has adverse impact on fair lending. It has impact on our banking, and it has broader impact certainly on retail. For a small business owner that may heavily rely on contracting in, near federal buildings or certainly in proximity or even in the airports, who may be a vendor, they're not going to get that money back. The creditors still want their money. And so for reserves or even, as we're talking about opportunities and collateral to look for other opportunities for businesses to scale up, that's loss. That's just one part of what we're going to see from this fallout. And as we're coming into the holidays, you've seen impact on vendors that support supply chain efforts for holidays, not just for food services, but other products.
Shayla Moon is giving us the update, and I've got a couple more questions. I'm sure we've got to stay, you know, keeping our eyes on policy because that does impact us. Who governs actually matters. And we're actually seeing that right now. Who do you think, politically speaking, in terms of this shutdown, um, which party or individuals come out looking as emerged leaders? Like, because everything is like this perception, it's like this chess game that's taking
Mhm.
place. And, some reports are suggesting that, the Senate Majority Leader is amongst those who have flexed their muscles, etc. Politically, how does this look? Like when you say this is a bad look, or
It's not a good look for us right now. And again, I hate given just what happened over the last week with the recent elections that this may take away from some of that momentum. But chaos makes room for creativity and opportunity. And I feel that amidst this struggle, you have had people more tuned in to civic engagement and then tuned in into what their civic duty is in the space of leadership than probably what we've had, dare I say, maybe since within the last 10 years, maybe even going back to the first administration and election of former President Obama, of people saying, you know what, I want to do something. I'm in tune. I'm watching this. And you are going to see the uptick of the new face of the party. And I do largely believe that that is one of the positive outcomes of this. So all is not lost. And as I said, you've got now 79 days for them to figure out what it's going to look like. You have the evaluation of the emoluments and the violations of ethics and all of these things that are going to come to the forefront. And you're going to see new faces and voices. And I think because of what the face is of those 8 individuals, they're old and they're white.
huh?
And
Well,
I think that you are going to see a lot of momentum of young leadership. You're going to see the uptick of people still entering into a filing space within the next 90 days to run in the next midterms because they want to make a difference. They saw that something clearly is broken in our election system, as well as the duties and goals and objectives of Congress. And if people, feel that they can do it better, you're going to have a lot of people who are going to step out there. You're going to hear new thoughts and new ideas, and I think that's probably one of the best things to where maybe this is what the party needed to have people evaluating what the current Congress looks like, its makeup, its demographics.
wow.
I am kind of critical of the CBC that I know a good maybe 60% of them are over the age of 75. And,
Wow.
and and that's true to where maybe this becomes a question of putting in people who we know have the energy and excitement and still passionate about politics to make a difference for the greater good.
When you
Maxine Waters is, I believe, 88. Jim Clyburn is 84. And you go down the list, and even though they had been able to ascend to committee leadership And that is something else that is another barrier of getting new faces in there, is that, of those who did vote, they're in leadership. Dick Durbin is the whip. Senator Shaheen is on appropriations. Senator Kane, he leads a lot of our foreign relations efforts and armed service efforts. So it's going to be as to who is willing and has the ability to step into that space given their seniority in Congress right now.